Picture this: the sun rising over a cobblestone street in the year 1350, where the morning air hums with the rhythm of a waking world so different from our own. The clang of a blacksmith's hammer mingles with the shouts of merchants, the laughter of children, and the steady scrape of a knife against wood. But listen closer. Among these familiar sounds are whispers of trade so strange, so specific, they've vanished from memory. Today, we're stepping into the shoes of those forgotten workers, the men and women who filled roles so peculiar, you'd swear they were plucked from a fantasy novel. Welcome to a journey through 30 medieval professions you've never heard of, where every job tells a story of survival, creativity, and sometimes sheer absurdity. Think you know the Middle Ages? Think again. Beyond the knights and kings, the castles and cathedrals, there existed a hidden web of labor that kept society spinning. Imagine someone whose entire job was to taste the king's food for poison, a human safety net with every meal, or the ale conner, who tested beer quality by sitting in a puddle of it. Yes, you heard that right. Their methods might seem bizarre to us now, but these roles were deadly serious in their time. This was an era where every need, no matter how niche, spawned a profession, some brilliant, some baffling, all fascinating. And as we peel back the layers of history, you'll discover how these jobs reveal the ingenuity, humor, and sometimes desperation of medieval life. What makes these forgotten trades so captivating isn't just their oddity, it's what they teach us about the people who lived them. Each profession is a window into the fears, values, and daily struggles of an era long past. How did someone end up as a whipping boy, taking punishments for a prince's misdeeds? Why did towns employ gong farmers to handle waste in ways that would make modern plumbers blush? The answers paint a vivid portrait of a world where necessity bred invention, and where even the strangest jobs held communities together. So grab a seat at the medieval table, metaphorically, of course, because by the end of this video, you'll never look at history the same way again. Ready to meet the unsung heroes and occasional oddballs of the Middle Ages? Let's begin. The ale conner might sound like a job dreamed up after one too many pints, but in medieval England it was deadly serious business. Picture this official, often a respected town elder dressed in sturdy leather breeches, solemnly pouring freshly brewed ale onto a wooden bench before taking a seat right in the middle of the puddle. If the liquid clung stubbornly to their pants, the brew was declared too sugary, likely watered down or poorly fermented, but if it rolled off cleanly, that was the mark of a proper, high-quality ale. This wasn't just about taste, it was about survival. In an era when contaminated water could kill, beer was the beverage of choice for everyone, from children to kings. The ale conner's bizarre method ensured no one was cheated by dishonest brewers, protecting both public health and wallets. What's truly remarkable is how this profession reveals the social fabric of the time. Ale conners weren't just quality inspectors, they were enforcers of fairness, often paid in barrels of ale for their services. Their judgments could make or break a brewer's reputation, and their presence at markets was as vital as any tax collector's. Yet beneath the humor of their methods lies a deeper truth. Medieval societies were built on trust, and roles like this one were the glue holding daily life together. Now let's turn from the ale-soaked benches to a far less glamorous but equally essential role, one that dealt with what happened after all that beer was consumed. While the ale conner ensured quality, the gong farmer handled the messy aftermath. These were the men and women tasked with cleaning out cesspits and privies, often working under cover of darkness to remove waste from towns. It was dangerous, revolting work. Exposure to raw sewage brought disease, and collapsing pits could bury workers alive. Yet without gong farmers, medieval cities would have drowned in their own filth. The contrast between these two professions couldn't be starker. One seated in ale as a symbol of communal trust, the other knee-deep in waste as an unsung hero of public health. Together, they paint a vivid picture of a society balancing celebration and survival, where even the strangest jobs were threads in the tapestry of daily life. And speaking of survival, our next profession took personal risk to another level. Meet the whipping boy, who suffered the lashes meant for young royalty. The gong farmer's job was the medieval equivalent of a biohazard specialist, only without the protective gear or dignity. Imagine descending into a cramped, reeking cesspit by flickering torchlight, shovel in hand, knowing one wrong step could send you plunging into the foul depths below. These workers braved not just the stench but very real dangers: methane explosions, collapsing trenches, and diseases like dysentery that could strike with terrifying speed. Yet towns paid them handsomely, sometimes even exempting them from taxes because everyone understood the grim alternative. Without gong farmers, streets would have overflowed with waste, turning crowded cities like London into breeding grounds for pandemics long before the Black Death. What's fascinating is how these workers operated within strict social rules. Many were only allowed to work between 9 at night and 5 in the morning, when the wealthy wouldn't risk glimpsing them. Their carts loaded with night soil had to follow designated routes outside town walls, where the waste was often sold as fertilizer, a rare example of medieval recycling. Some gong farmers even formed guilds, negotiating better pay for their grueling labor. This wasn't just dirty work, it was a sophisticated system of urban survival, proving even the most reviled jobs held society together. Now let's shift from the depths of cesspits to the dizzying heights of medieval entertainment, where the bearward turned danger into spectacle. These men were the ringmasters of their day, training bears to dance often on hot metal plates, or staging brutal fights between chained animals for roaring crowds. Bearwards traveled between taverns and fairs, their lumbering charges both a source of awe and a grim reminder of humanity's dominance over nature. While the cruelty horrifies modern sensibilities, in the Middle Ages, these shows were as commonplace as street performers and far more lucrative. A skilled bearward could earn enough to buy land, his bizarre expertise prized by nobles and peasants alike. The contrast between these two professions, one hidden in darkness, the other basking in applause, shows how medieval society compartmentalized its discomforts. Just as people paid gong farmers to cart away waste unseen, they paid bearwards to confront the wildness they feared, transforming it into entertainment. Both jobs, in their own ways, tamed the untamable, whether it was filth or fury. And speaking of fury, our next profession weaponized it. Meet the whiffer, whose job was to sniff out treason in the most unexpected places. The bearward's life was a paradox: part showman, part beastmaster, walking a razor's edge between admiration and danger. These men didn't just parade their bears through town squares. They forged precarious bonds with animals that could crush a human skull with a single swipe. Training methods were far from gentle. Bears were often declawed, their teeth filed down, and their spirits broken through relentless conditioning. Some were forced to dance on scorching metal plates, their movements driven by pain rather than rhythm. Others faced packs of snarling dogs in bear baiting pits, where crowds cheered as blood splattered the sawdust. It's a stark reminder of how medieval entertainment blurred the line between spectacle and cruelty. Yet bearwards weren't mere villains. Many saw themselves as custodians of their animals, however flawed their care might seem today. a prized bear could be worth a small fortune, so keeping it alive and healthy, if not happy, was good business. Some bearwoods even penned manuals on animal handling, sharing tips for calming agitated beasts or treating injuries. Their work fed a public hunger for the exotic, a craving rooted in an era when most people would never glimpse a live bear outside captivity. For peasants who'd never traveled beyond their village, these performances were like windows into a wilder world. The profession also reveals medieval society's uneasy relationship with nature. Bears symbolized untamed power, feared, revered, and ultimately subdued for human amusement. Towns regulated bearwoods heavily, requiring licenses and banning shows near churches, as if the animal's presence might taint holy ground. But the contradictions ran deep. The same crowds that crossed themselves at the sight of a bear would later toss coins to see it suffer. Now, let's leave the raucous fairgrounds behind for a quieter but equally essential trade, one that fought battles not with beasts but with bad odors. Meet the herb strewer, the unsung hero of medieval hygiene. While bearwoods dealt in roars and bloodshed, these men and women filled castles and churches with the scent of lavender, rosemary, and mint. Their job was simple but vital, scattering fresh herbs across floors to mask the stench of unwashed bodies, rotting food, and chamber pots. In an age before sanitation, their work wasn't just about comfort, it was a frontline defense against disease, as many believed foul smells carried illness. The contrast between these two professions couldn't be sharper. One thrived on violence and noise, the other on subtlety and scent. Yet both, in their own ways, tamed the chaos of medieval life, one by dominating nature, the other by disguising its less savory truths. And as we'll soon discover, even the herb strewer's fragrant work had its dark side. The herb strewer's work was a delicate art of deception, turning castles and cathedrals from reeking dens into fragrant havens with nothing more than handfuls of crushed leaves. Picture them moving through grand halls before dawn, scattering lavender like breadcrumbs for nobility to follow, masking the musk of unwashed bodies and rotting rushes underfoot. Their arsenal included rosemary for purification, mint for invigoration, and sweet woodruff to drown out the ever-present stench of chamber pots. In churches, where incense couldn't always cover the odor of crowded congregations, herb strewers laid time between pews like a botanical carpet, turning piety into a multisensory experience. But this wasn't just medieval potpourri, it was public health in action. People believed foul smells carried disease long before germ theory, making herb strewers the first line of defense against miasma, the dreaded bad air thought to cause plagues. Some strewers even specialized in plague prevention blends, tossing wormwood and sage into streets during outbreaks. Their recipes were guarded secrets, passed down like apothecary knowledge, and their services were so valued that royal households kept them on permanent staff. Queen Elizabeth I reportedly demanded her privy chambers be strewn with fresh herbs daily, a luxury that separated palaces from peasant hovels where straw molded until it choked. The irony, many herbs they scattered like pennyroyal or tansy were toxic in large doses, quietly poisoning the very air they were meant to cleanse. It's a fitting metaphor for the Middle Ages. Even solutions came with hidden dangers. Now let's step from the perfumed shadows of castles into the stark light of justice, where the whipping boy took punishment meant for princes. Unlike herb strewers who sweetened reality, these children lived a bitter paradox, suffering lashes when young royals misbehaved because no one dared strike a future king. Their tears were the price of privilege, their backs a ledger for royal mistakes. And in that cruel trade, we see the jagged edges of a society that polished its silver with other people's pain. The whipping boy's job was a cruel twist of medieval logic where one child's tears bought another's lesson. Imagine being dragged from your family as a boy, not to serve as a page or scribe, but as a human punching bag for royal tantrums. When Prince Henry VIII forgot his Latin or Edward VI talked back to his tutors, it wasn't their backs that bore the welts. The theory was simple yet brutal. Nobility's blood was too sacred for the rod, but a prince would supposedly feel such guilt seeing his friend suffer that he'd reform. In reality, many royals grew up viewing their whipping boys as disposable shock absorbers, living reminders that pain was always someone else's problem. Records from the court of King Charles I reveal the psychological toll. One whipping boy, William Murray, endured years of beatings only to later become the king's closest confidant, a twisted bond forged by shared trauma. Others weren't so lucky, discarded like used parchment once their royal charges outgrew the schoolroom. The practice exposes the era's obsession with bloodlines, even justice bent around birthright, creating a world where suffering trickled down but never up. Now let's march from the shadowed halls of privilege to the muddy fields of war, where the Pavisa shielded armies with nothing but wood and grit. These unsung soldiers carried massive rectangular shields, some taller than a man, forming mobile walls against hails of arrows. While knights basked in glory, Pavisas absorbed the brunt of battles, their names lost to history as they locked shields in sweating, trembling lines. Their work was sheer physics meets desperation. Angled just right, a Pavis could deflect crossbow bolts. Held wrong, it became a death sentence. What's startling is how these shield bearers doubled as medieval engineers. Between battles, they'd plant their pavises in the ground like temporary fortresses, creating instant archer stations or field hospitals. Some even painted family crests or religious symbols on their shields, not for vanity, but so fallen comrades could be identified beneath piles of bodies. The job demanded strength and stamina, yet Pavisas were often conscripted peasants, given the riskiest duties without the knightly pay. Their legacy lives on in the word pavement, a reminder of how these human bulwarks literally paved the way for armies to advance. From the whipping boys' silent suffering to the Pavisas' deafening battlefields, both professions reveal how medieval society outsourced its pain, whether to a child's flesh or a peasant's arms. And as we'll see next, even the most brutal jobs had their own strange dignity. The armorer's assistant was the battlefield's unsung mechanic, a master of quick fixes in the heat of chaos. Picture a muddy war camp at dawn, where knights clank toward the fray while these shadowy figures dart between them, tightening straps, hammering out dents, and replacing shattered rivets with hands that moved like clockwork. Their toolkit was a medieval first aid kit for steel, pliers for twisted mail, leather punches for fraying straps, and miniature anvils for reshaping breastplates crumpled by mace blows. One chronicle from the 100 Years' War describes an assistant working frantically as arrows rained down, using his own body as a shield to protect a knight's exposed gorget until repairs were done, a moment of loyalty that blurred the line between servant and savior. What set these workers apart was their intimate knowledge of movement. A poorly aligned knee counter could hobble a knight as effectively as an enemy sword. So assistants perfected the art of armor ergonomics centuries before the term existed. They'd watch fighters stride in their gear, spotting where metal pinched or plates screeched, then adjust with the precision of a tailor fitting a doublet. Some even developed signature techniques, like packing crushed beeswax into joints to silence telltale creaks during stealthy night marches. Their work wasn't just maintenance. It was the difference between a knight fighting at full strength or dying from a single stuck latch. Now let's trade the clangor of the battlefield for the vibrant clamor of the marketplace, where the limner turned everyday objects into dazzling works of art. These were the illustrators of their age, painting everything from shop signs to manuscript margins with pigments ground from lapis lazuli, crushed beetles, and even toxic arsenic compounds. While armorers' assistants kept metal functional, limners made the mundane magnificent, transforming a butcher's stall into a gallery with a painted hog, or gilding a merchant's ledger until it shimmered like treasure. Their brushes wielded magic as potent as any sword, turning the medieval world into a canvas where even cobblestones might bloom with color. The limner's brush was a bridge between worlds, transforming blank parchment into explosions of color that made medieval manuscripts glow like stained glass. These artists didn't just decorate books, they breathed life into them, painting everything from delicate floral borders around psalms to grotesque monsters lurking in lore texts. Picture a dim scriptorium where a limner's hand, steadied by years of discipline, applied gold leaf so thin it floated on the page like sunlight caught in honey. Their pigments were alchemy, ultramarine blue ground from lapis lazuli worth more than gold, vibrant reds made from crushed insects, and greens so toxic they sometimes poisoned the very pages they adorned. But limners were more than illustrators, they were storytellers and teachers. In an era when most couldn't read, their images carried the weight of scripture and history. A well-painted martyr's agony could move a congregation to tears. A whimsical margin-dwelling rabbit jousting a snail might hint at subversive humor. Some limners even embedded hidden messages, like painting a nobleman's face onto a Judas figure as quiet rebellion. Their work demanded not just skill but endurance. A single Bible could take years to illuminate, with mistakes often requiring entire pages to be scraped clean and restarted. What's astonishing is how these artists blended devotion with practicality. They developed tricks like using egg whites to make colors pop or urine to fix mistakes. Yes, really. Guilds guarded their techniques fiercely, yet some limners still signed their work with tiny self-portraits, peeking from corners like medieval Easter eggs. Their legacy lives on in terms like illumination, which literally means to light up, because that's precisely what they did for knowledge in the Dark Ages. Now, let's step from the limner's glowing pages to the rhythmic ticking of a profession that measured time itself. Before clocks, towns relied on the clock knocker, a human metronome who patrolled streets with a staff, rapping on doors to mark the hours. These walkers of the night carried the weight of time in their footsteps, calling out changes in shifts, market openings, or curfews with the reliability of a living sundial. Imagine their lonely vigil through freezing winters or plague-emptied streets. There knocks the heartbeat of a society learning to structure its days. The clock knocker's world was one of eerie precision. Trained to count footsteps between stations, they often carried hourglasses or observed stars to keep their rhythms true. In some cities, their rounds were so trusted that bakers timed ovens by their passing, and midwives counted knocks to track labor pains. Yet this was perilous work. Mistakes meant fines, and nightwalkers risked thieves or superstitious attacks from those who believed timekeepers trafficked with dark forces. Their eventual obsolescence as mechanical clocks spread marked not just technological progress but the quiet end of an intimate, human-scale way of marking life's passage. From the limner's vibrant pages to the clock knocker's echoing staff, both professions shared a sacred task, making the intangible tangible. One gave form to faith and knowledge, the other to time itself, proof that even in the Middle Ages, people yearned to capture fleeting things with their hands and voices. And as we'll see next, some professions didn't just capture the invisible, they fought it head-on. The hourglass maker's workshop was a sanctuary of precision in a world where time often felt like sand slipping through fingers. These craftsmen didn't just blow glass, they engineered moments, carefully calculating the flow of grains between bulbs to measure everything from sermons to ship shifts. Picture them hunched over furnaces, twisting molten glass into symmetrical chambers, then sealing them with wax to test the pour of crushed marble or powdered eggshell. Too coarse and the sand rushed like a waterfall, too fine and it clogged like damp sugar. The best makers boasted hourglasses that deviated less than a minute per hour, a feat rivaling mechanical clocks in accuracy. What's often overlooked is how these devices shaped daily life. Churches relied on pulse glasses to limit fiery preachers from ranting past salvation. Naval captains hung them near the helm to time watch rotations, their rhythmic flipping sinking crews across oceans. Even kitchens used miniature versions called eyeglasses to boil perfect yolks. The maker's signature, some embedded flecks of mica or gold in the sand, turning practical tools into shimmering status symbols. But their true artistry lay in customization, adjusting sand types for humid climates or crafting emergency flasks with quick-release caps for sailors to restart time during storms. Now, let's trade the hourglass maker's silent measurements for the boisterous judgment of the ale taster, a medieval food critic with legal teeth. Unlike today's reviewers, these officials wielded authority to fine dishonest brewers or bakers on the spot. Clad in ceremonial robes, they'd move through markets with a tankard and loaf in hand, sampling wares not for subtle flavors but for outright fraud. Watery beer or chalk-stretched flour meant public humiliation in the stocks. Their verdicts weren't just opinions, they were binding rulings that could bankrupt a tradesman or crown a new town favorite. The contrast between these two professions, one measuring minutes, the other trust, shows how medieval society balanced innovation and accountability. Both were guardians of order in their own ways, ensuring that whether time or trade, nothing slipped through the cracks unnoticed. And speaking of guardians, our next profession didn't just judge quality, they defended entire towns with their noses. Meet the whiffer, whose sense of smell could literally sniff out treason. The sausage inspector patrolled markets with the vigilance of a bloodhound, sniffing out deceit where others saw only savory links. In an era before food labels or health codes, these officials were the last line of defense against butchers who stretched meat with sawdust, dyed spoiled cuts with toxic copper sulfate, or most notoriously hid rodent flesh inside casings. Armed with knives and an encyclopedic knowledge of anatomy, they'd slice open suspicious sausages to inspect texture and color, sometimes tasting samples despite the risk. Records from Nuremberg describe inspectors seizing entire batches of mystery meat sausages, their makers fined or even pilloried for endangering public health. What made their work extraordinary was the science behind it. Seasoned inspectors could identify adulterated meat by touch alone. Real pork had a distinct springiness, while filler made it feel mealy. They checked casings for unnatural dyes by holding links to candlelight, knowing authentic intestine should glow faintly translucent. Some cities required butchers to stamp each sausage with unique seals, creating medieval traceability. The inspectors' judgments weren't just about purity, they upheld social order. When shortages drove up prices, corrupt butchers preyed on the poor, selling hunger sausages packed with offal and rancid fat. By cracking down, inspectors became unlikely heroes of the working class. Now, let's trade the butcher's stall for the moonlit streets where the night watchman's lantern carved islands of safety in the dark. These weren't just sleepy guards, they were human alarm systems, trained to distinguish between a drunk's stumble and a burglar's crouch. Their calls marked time like living clocks, 2 o'clock and all's well. Or the chilling fire and flee that sent families scrambling. Armed only with a pike and a whistle, they faced real danger. Watchmen in London's records died breaking up tavern brawls or spotting arsonists mid-torch. The night watchman's true weapon was knowledge. They memorized every creaking signboard, every merchant's lock routine, noticing when a door hung slightly ajar. Some carried lanthorn books, illustrated guides to identifying wanted criminals by scars or gait. Their presence was so trusted that shopkeepers left keys with them, and mothers asked them to check on feverish children during rounds. Yet theirs was a lonely vigil, often filled with false alarms and freezing hours, their pay barely covering threadbare cloaks. In a world without streetlights, these men didn't just chase thieves. They held back the night itself, one echoing call at a time. The Waits were the soundtrack of the medieval night, part musician, part guardian, their melodies weaving through dark streets like threads of light. Clad in official livery, these town-appointed performers carried instruments as deftly as they wielded lanterns, playing every hour to mark time while their watchful eyes scanned for trouble. A shawm's sharp call might announce midnight, then soften into a soothing tune to reassure sleepless families that danger hadn't breached the gates. In York, records show Waits patrolling with silver chains of office, their music so prized that disrupting their rounds carried heavier fines than ordinary noise complaints. But their role went beyond entertainment. Waits were the original neighborhood watch, trained to spot cracked shutters or unfamiliar faces lurking in alleys. Some towns required them to memorize every household's residents, turning their nightly walks into census-taking missions. Their instruments doubled as alarms. A sudden blast from a curved horn could rally constables to a brawl, while a skipped melody signaled distress. The most skilled even developed musical codes, changing tunes to indicate fires, floods, or approaching riders. What made them truly extraordinary was how they balanced artistry with authority. By day, Waits taught music to wealthy children or performed at weddings. By night, they became the ears and voice of the town itself. In an era before streetlights, their presence turned fear into familiarity, proof that even in darkness, beauty and order could share the same breath. Now, let's step from the moonlit melodies of the Waits to the sunlit chambers of a profession obsessed with appearances. Meet the comb maker, whose delicate tools sculpted bone and ivory into the vanity staples of the medieval elite. While Waits guarded the night, these craftsmen defined daytime dignity, one tooth at a time. The barber-surgeon's striped pole wasn't just a shop sign, it was a medieval billboard advertising services that would make modern patients faint. These dual practitioners wielded razors and lancets with equal ease, transforming their bustling shops into makeshift operating theaters. One moment they'd be trimming a merchant's beard, the next performing an amputation with tools sterilized in nothing more than boiling ale. Their iconic red and white poles symbolized the bloody bandages hung out to dry, spinning in the wind like macabre flags. Yet for all their crude methods, barber surgeons were pioneers. They developed early techniques for setting bones, stitched wounds with horsehair thread, and even attempted cataract surgeries using needles to displace clouded eye lenses. What's fascinating is how their trade embodied medieval practicality. Without formal medical schools, barbers already skilled with sharp instruments became de facto doctors for the masses. Guild records show apprentices trained for years, learning anatomy through dissections of executed criminals and practicing sutures on pig carcasses. The smarter ones studied ancient texts, combining haircuts with consultations on humoral imbalances. A client might leave with a shave and a prescription for leeches applied to their excess blood. The line between beautician and healer was so blurred that some barber surgeons even doubled as dentists, using repurposed pliers for extractions while assistants held patients down with wine-soaked rags. The profession's legacy lingers in unexpected places. That blue liquid in modern barber bottles, a sanitizing tradition dating back to when barber surgeons used copper sulfate to disinfect tools between bloodlettings. And the very word surgeon comes from the Greek for handwork, a nod to these hands-on healers who proved medicine could thrive outside monastery walls. Now let's step from the blood-stained floors of the barber surgeon to the dusty workshops of the mason's assistant, whose backbreaking labor literally built the Middle Ages. While barbers worked in the open, these unsung heroes toiled in shadows, hauling stones for cathedrals they'd never see finished. Their calloused hands mixed mortar, carved foundation blocks, and operated treadwheel cranes, human hamsters powering the rise of Gothic spires. Unlike master masons who signed their work with secret marks, assistants left no names, only the invisible fingerprints of sweat in every wall. Yet their work demanded precision as exacting as any surgeon's. A poorly mixed batch of lime mortar could crumble under a vault's weight, and misaligned cornerstone blocks doomed entire towers. Some assistants specialized in putlog holes, temporary supports for scaffolding that later became nesting spots for medieval pigeons. Others developed tricks like wetting stones in winter so expanding ice would split them cleanly, early quarrying hacks that saved weeks of chiseling. The mason's assistant's true genius lay in adaptation. When local stone ran out, they learned to patch buildings with galleting, embedding flint chips in mortar like a mosaic. During the Black Death, they improvised plague-resistant mortar by adding crushed pottery, unknowingly creating antibacterial surfaces centuries before germ theory. Their labor was the mortar holding society together quite literally, in an age when buildings weren't just shelters but statements of faith and power. And as we'll see next, some professions didn't just shape stone, they shaped minds. The pargetter's hands moved like poets across wet plaster, transforming blank walls into stories that outlasted generations. These weren't just decorators, they were illusionists, molding damp lime and sand into sprawling forests of vines, mythical beasts, and even entire biblical scenes that seemed to breathe when candlelight flickered across their curves. In an age before wallpaper, their work turned merchant houses into status symbols, with intricate Tudor roses or heraldic beasts announcing a family's wealth without a word spoken. The finest pargetters traveled like rock stars of their craft, summoned by nobles to embellish grand halls with raised work, three-dimensional designs so delicate they resembled carved stone rather than hardened paste. What's astonishing is how these artists turned a practical material into pure poetry. Plaster was medieval home insulation, slapped onto walls to block drafts. But pargetters saw its potential, mixing in goat hair for strength or crushed marble for a luminous sheen. Their tools were simple feathers for fine lines, carved wooden stamps for repeating patterns, yet their techniques were fiercely guarded secrets. Some designs hid clever tricks. A raised border might deflect smoke from hearths upward, while textured patterns could mask cracks in aging walls. In Suffolk, entire streets still boast pargeted facades from the 1500s, their whimsical gargoyles and geometric knots defying time like whispers from artisans long gone. Now, let's step from the pargetter's ornate walls to the dusty roads where the summer insured travelers didn't vanish into the wilderness. While pargetters beautified stationary homes, these guides were the human GPS of medieval Europe, memorizing every ford, forest shortcut, and bandit haunt along routes stretching from London to Jerusalem. Their nickname came from leading pilgrim groups during safe summer months, but their expertise was year-round survival. A good summer could spot quicks, and by the way reeds bent, predict storms from cloud shapes over distant peaks, and most crucially, negotiate with local warlords for safe passage. The contrast between these professions reveals medieval priorities. One crafted beauty to impress, the other mastered danger to endure. Both, in their own ways, shaped how people experienced the world, whether through a pargetter's fleeting glimpse of paradise on a ceiling or a summer's steady hand through treacherous terrain. And as we'll see next, even the most practical guides sometimes trafficked in something far more valuable than directions. The summoner's job was equal parts bureaucrat and bounty hunter, a lone figure riding into villages with parchment threats that could upend lives. Clutching his satchel of court orders, he'd announce debts, land disputes, or criminal charges to families who might greet him with curses or clubs. Some summons were mundane, a baker fined for selling underweight loaves. Others carried the weight of doom, like eviction notices for farmers after bad harvests. What made the work perilous wasn't just the miles, it was the fury of those who saw royal justice as tyranny. Chroniclers tell of summoners ambushed in forests, their papers stuffed down their throats, or found drowned in ditches with wax seals still clutched in stiff hands. Yet summoners weren't always villains. The smart ones carried small mercies, extending deadlines for widows or bartering testimony for reduced fines. Their detailed records became accidental histories, preserving everything from tavern brawls to inheritance squabbles. Some even acted as medieval process servers for the church, delivering notices of excommunication that could exile souls as surely as a sheriff's writ exiled bodies. Their leather boots wore paths between worlds, the ink-stamped order of courts and the raw, defiant pulse of villages where justice often meant survival. Now let's trade dusty roads for rolling waves, where the caulker fought battles against an enemy no sword could pierce the sea itself. These shipwrights were the unsung saviors of every vessel, stuffing oakum tarry rope fibers between hull planks with mallets and iron wedges until the seams wept black. A poorly caulked ship didn't just leak, it groaned apart in storms, drowning crews in minutes. The best caulkers could detect weak spots by ear, tapping hulls like doctors percussing lungs, listening for the hollow echoes of rot. Their work demanded a ballet of strength and precision, hanging over docks upside down to reach keels, or crouching in airless bilges where the stench of tar and brine choked like fog. What's astonishing is how these artisans turned everyday materials into maritime miracles. They mixed their own sealants, sometimes adding crushed garlic as a natural fungicide or animal hair for elasticity. Viking caulkers used moss and wool soaked in pine resin, creating watertight barriers that crossed oceans. Mediterranean shipwrights swore by a concoction of wax and pumice that hardened like rock. Every port had its secrets, passed down in families like sacred texts. When the Mary Rose sank in 1545, investigators blamed not cannon fire but rushed caulking, proof that even kings' fleets relied on these nameless workers. The caulker's legacy lingers in our language. Watertight and shipshape both sprang from their craft, reminders of an era when survival depended on the patience of hands pressing tar into wood. And as we'll see next, some professions didn't just keep ships floating, they charted where they dared to go. The caulker's hands were the final guardians between a crew and the crushing depths, their tar-stained fingers pressing oakum into seams with the care of surgeons closing wounds. This wasn't just maintenance, it was alchemy. They transformed frayed rope fibers and pine pitch into barriers strong enough to defy oceans, hammering each strand into place until hulls grown tighter than drum skins. Picture them suspended over docks like spiders, their mallets tapping rhythmic codes across a ship's belly, listening for the hollow echoes of rot that could doom a voyage. The best caulkers worked by instinct, knowing when to mix extra lime into their tar for tropical heat or add crushed horsehair for flexibility in icy northern seas. Their recipes were trade secrets passed father to son, scribbled in margins of notebooks alongside sketches of mermaids and storms. What's often forgotten is how their craft shaped history. When Henry V invaded France in 1415, his fleet's survival depended on caulkers working round the clock to patch storm-battered hulls between battles. Viking longships crossed the Atlantic thanks to moss and wool caulking that swelled tighter in water. Even Columbus's leaky Santa Maria might have sunk mid-voyage without makeshift repairs using melted candle wax and shredded cloaks. These unsung artisans didn't just fix ships, they enabled empires, their tar pots as vital to conquest as any cannon. Now, let's leave the salt-crusted docks for the smoke-choked fields where the hard-bread baker turned flour into the unlikeliest of weapons. While caulkers fought the sea, these bakers waged war against hunger itself, crafting biscuits so durable they could outlast sieges, and sometimes the men who ate them. The huffer's back bent under sacks heavier than a man, his footsteps carving unseen paths through mud and blood. While knights charged toward glory, these unsung laborers formed the true supply lines of medieval warfare, human pack mules hauling grain, arrows, and salt pork across miles of unforgiving terrain. A single huffer might carry 100 pounds of flour strapped to his shoulders, his breath ragged as he matched the army's brutal pace. Chroniclers rarely noted their names, but records hint at their suffering. Pay stubs showing meager wages docked for spilled grain, or mass graves where huffers lay beside soldiers, their spines twisted from years of bearing burdens no beast would endure. What made their work extraordinary was the ingenuity behind the grind. Seasoned huffers developed techniques to distribute weight evenly, wrapping sacks in woven grass mats to prevent chafing during marathon marches. Some armies employed huffer chains, lines of men passing supplies hand to hand like bucket brigades during river crossings. The smartest ones knew when to ration their strength, hoarding energy for the final push to besieged castles where a single extra sack of grain could mean the difference between mutiny and victory. Their legacy lingers in our language. The very word huff comes from the labored breaths of these forgotten workhorses of war. Now, let's step from the battlefield's dust to the flickering glow of a profession that held darkness at bay. While huffers fueled armies, the lamplighter waged his own nightly war against the blackness that swallowed medieval streets whole. Armed with nothing but a ladder and a flask of precious oil, these men climbed rickety poles to tend public lanterns, their flames fragile defiance against a world where nightfall meant danger. In an age before matches, their skill with tinder and wick bordered on sorcery. One misplaced spark could ignite rooftops, yet too timid a flame left alleys ripe for cutpurses. The lamplighter's rounds were a dance with shadows. His route took him past shuttered shops and sleeping homes, each lit lantern a promise of safety to those awake past curfew. Some towns paid lamplighters extra to serve as lookouts, their elevated perches perfect for spotting fires or fleeing criminals. The best developed tricks like adding salt to oil to reduce smoking, or using polished metal reflectors to magnify a candle's glow. Their work was as much psychology as practicality. The mere sight of a lamplighter's ladder leaning against a post could deter thieves, proof that light wasn't just illumination but a weapon against chaos. Where the huffer's strength fed bodies, the lamplighter's flame fed hope, two sides of the same medieval coin, both proving that survival often depended on those who worked in the dark. The tallow chandler's workshop reeked of rendered fat and wood smoke, a pungent testament to one of history's most vital trades. These artisans didn't just make candles, they crafted portable suns, dipping wicks into vats of melted sheep or beef fat until the layers built up like tree rings. The process was equal parts chemistry and endurance. Too hot and the tallow burned the wick, too cold and the candles grew lumpy as porridge. A skilled chandler could judge temperature by the sheen on the molten fat, stirring in beeswax for wealthier clients or sprinkling salt to reduce smoking. Their products lit everything from peasant hovels to royal feasts, each flickering flame pushing back the darkness that governed medieval nights. But this was no simple craft. Tallow chandlers had to master the quirks of their materials. Mutton fat burned cleaner than pork, while candle wicks needed constant trimming to prevent guttering, that dreaded tunnel of wax that wasted precious light. Some developed signature blends, like adding lavender to mask the rancid smell or bayberries for a festive green hue. Their workshops doubled as medieval hardware stores, selling candle holders, snuffers, and even rushlights, cheaper alternatives made by dipping reeds in fat. The trade's importance was enshrined in law. London's Chandlers' Guild had the right to confiscate substandard tallow, and dishonest merchants faced public shame in the stocks. What's often overlooked is how these candles shaped daily rhythms. A typical household might ration just 2 hours of light per evening, enough for mending clothes or sharing stories, but never for wasted time. The chandler's craft was the clock of the common people, their candles measuring out life's fleeting moments one drip at a time. Now, let's step from the smoky glow of the chandler's workshop to the vibrant world of medieval fashion, where the pursemaker turned leather into wearable art. While chandlers conquered darkness, these craftsmen adorned the daylight hours, stitching pouches that held everything from coins to love letters. Their work combined utility with vanity, proving that even in the Middle Ages, accessories spoke volumes. The Paternoster maker's workshop was a symphony of devotion and dexterity, where prayer took physical form one bead at a time. These artisans transformed chunks of amber, slivers of jet, and even fruit pits into sacred necklaces that slid through pious fingers like liquid faith. Each rosary told 2 stories, the spiritual journey of its owner and the earthly skill of its creator. Picture a craftsman hunched over a lathe, shaping rosary beads so uniform they'd pass muster under a priest's scrutiny, then stringing them with silk dyed in monastic hues, Lenten purple, Easter gold. The finest makers carved beads with miniature scenes of saints or inlaid them with slivers of holy relics, turning jewelry into portable altars. What set these craftsmen apart was their intimate knowledge of sacred symbolism. A standard rosary had 59 beads representing the Ave Marias and Paternosters, but special orders might include gauds, larger beads marking each decade's start, often made from rare materials like fossilized mammoth ivory or aromatic sandalwood. Some Paternoster makers even developed secret techniques, like soaking pear wood beads in wine to deepen their color to mimic costly ebony. Their clientele ranged from queens who wore rosaries as status symbols to paupers clutching knotted ropes, because even the humblest materials could become holy when touched by prayer. The trade's darker side emerged in bustling markets, where dishonest sellers passed off dyed bone as jet or filled hollow amber beads with sand to add weight. Guild records from Bruges describe fines for makers who used resin counterfeits of precious materials, their fake beads melting in summer heat during pilgrimages. Yet the best Paternoster makers were more than merchants, they were keepers of comfort. Their creations clutched in birthing chambers, deathbeds, and battlefields alike. A well-worn rosary bore the gloss of countless prayers, its surface polished smooth as a pebble in a holy stream. Now, let's step from the hushed reverence of the Paternoster maker's workshop to the clamorous vigilance of the watch and ward. While rosaries soothed souls, these night patrols shielded bodies, marching through ink-black streets with lanterns and pikes. Every medieval town's survival depended on their sharp eyes and louder lungs, their cries of "all's well." More vital than any bell, the watch and ward weren't just guards, they were human alarm systems trained to spot danger in a world without streetlights. Some carried lanthorn books with sketches of wanted criminals, memorizing scars and gates like living databases. Others developed coded whistles to summon reinforcements silently, their signals cutting through tavern noise like falcon cries. Their rounds followed strict routes, past shuttered bakeries and over creaking bridges, checking for unattended fires or loiterers with evil intent. London's records describe watchmen testing door latches with practiced fingers, their calloused hands knowing which hinges should squeak and which silence betrayed tampering. What made their work extraordinary was the sheer unpredictability they faced. One night might mean breaking up a drunken brawl with nothing but a wooden baton. The next could bring a frantic chase after arsonists through smoke-choked alleys. Many died on duty, crushed by collapsing burning buildings or stabbed by thieves they'd cornered. Yet their pay was pitiful, often just a few pence per shift, leading some to take bribes for looking the other way. The smartest watchmen balanced authority with empathy, knowing when to drag an offender to the stocks versus giving a hungry bread thief a warning. Their true weapon wasn't the pike at their side, but the trust they built street by street, lamp by lamp, turning the medieval night from a lawless void into a space where community still breathed. The scavenger's broom was mightier than the sword when it came to saving medieval towns from suffocating under their own waste. These weren't mere street sweepers, they were sanitation enforcers armed with the authority to fine butchers for dumping offal in alleys or merchants for neglecting gutter cleanups. Picture them patrolling at dawn, their carts clattering over cobblestones as they collected everything from spoiled food to ashes from hearths, all while barking orders at reluctant citizens. In London, scavengers were so vital they reported directly to the mayor, their work considered as crucial to civic order as any sheriff's patrol. What set these officials apart was their sharp eye for health hazards. A skilled scavenger could spot the telltale signs of impending disease, a pile of fish guts attracting rats, or a blocked culvert creating stagnant pools perfect for breeding mosquitoes. Some carried vinegar-soaked cloths to mask the stench, while others developed early waste classification systems, separating reusable ash for brickmaking from rotting organic matter destined for dung heaps outside town walls. Their methods seem primitive now, but their impact was profound. Records show towns with active scavengers suffered fewer outbreaks during plague years, proving filth control was literally life-saving. The irony, many scavengers were former criminals serving out sentences, their dirty work both punishment and public service, yet the best took pride in their role, knowing they stood between order and chaos. When the Great Pestilence hit in 1348, it was often scavengers, not priests or nobles, who stayed to burn plague corpses, their faces wrapped in herb-stuffed masks against the miasma. Now let's trade the scavenger's grim duty for a profession that brought pure joy to medieval palates. Meet the comfort maker, the candy alchemist who turned sugar into edible jewels. While scavengers fought filth, these artisans crafted delicacies that gleamed like stained glass in banquet halls, proving even the darkest ages had their sweetness. The comfort maker's workshop shimmered like a medieval Willy Wonka's laboratory, a world where sugar was more precious than silver, and every bite was designed to dazzle. These confectioners didn't just cook, they performed alchemy, boiling honey, and imported cane sugar into glossy syrups to coat everything from ginger root to rose petals. Picture them hovering over copper pans, using delicate forks to dip apricots or aniseed into bubbling gold, then rolling each piece in powdered sugar until it glittered like frost. The finest comfits were status symbols, served in gilded boxes at royal weddings or tucked into the pockets of nobles as digestives. But beneath the sweetness lay serious skill. A single misstep could turn syrup into burnt bitterness, wasting ingredients worth a peasant's monthly wages. What made these treats extraordinary was their dual purpose. Beyond indulgence, comfits were medieval medicine in disguise. Clove-studded ones freshened breath after feasts heavy with garlic, while caraway-coated varieties settled upset stomachs. Some recipes called for ground pearls or gold leaf, believed to strengthen the heart. The comfort maker's art bridged the gap between apothecary and artist, their creations as likely to appear in a doctor's satchel as on a banquet table. Guild records from Venice reveal masters guarding recipes like state secrets, their workshops perfumed with cinnamon and ambergris, a far cry from the vinegar and ash stench of most medieval trades. Now, let's step from the sugar-dusted world of the comfort maker to the shadowy realm of the cunning folk, where remedies blurred into spells and a handful of herbs could mean the difference between healing and heresy. While confectioners sweetened lives openly, these practitioners walked a razor's edge, respected as healers one day, accused of witchcraft the next. Their tools were simples and sympathies, their trade as much about reading fears as mixing tinctures. In a world where a fever could be seen as divine punishment or demonic mischief, the cunning folk didn't just treat ailments, they negotiated with the unknown itself. The cunning folk walked a tightrope between reverence and suspicion, their hands as skilled with herbs as their words were with whispers of the unseen. In smoke-filled cottages and moonlit clearings, they prescribed remedies that blended sage leaves and superstition, a poultice of yarrow for wounds, a whispered charm to banish warts. Their knowledge was a patchwork of old pagan traditions and half-remembered monastic medicine, passed down through generations like treasured recipes. A villager might visit them for a love potion one day and a cure for milk-souring curses the next, trusting in their ability to navigate both the physical and supernatural worlds. What set these practitioners apart wasn't just their remedies but their role as mediators between fear and understanding. When a cow stopped giving milk or a child fell ill with fever, the cunning folk didn't just diagnose, they interpreted. Was the ailment natural or the work of a jealous neighbor's hex? Their treatments often included layers of psychological reassurance, a protective amulet woven from rowan twigs, a ritual to unbind misfortune that worked as much on the mind as the body. Some kept elaborate leech books, mixing practical advice like treating burns with honey alongside spells to ward off night hags. The line between healer and heretic was perilously thin. Church records bristle with accusations against cunning women who charmed away sickness with runes or scried futures in bowls of water. Yet even priests sometimes sought their help, turning a blind eye to unorthodox methods when official medicine failed. Their downfall came not from incompetence but competition. As universities trained physicians and apothecaries standardized treatments, the cunning folks' blend of magic and medicine was pushed to the margins, surviving only in folk tales and the odd hedge witch's garden. Now let's leave the shadowy world of folk healers for the bustling workshops of the armorer's seamstress, where cloth became armor and needles turned as deadly as swords. While cunning folk mended bodies with whispers and herbs, these women stitched the very fabric of medieval warfare, one painstaking seam at a time. The armorer's seamstress worked with fingers calloused from pulling waxed thread through layers of linen and leather, her stitches as vital to survival as any blacksmith's rivets. Gambesons, those quilted jackets worn beneath chainmail, were her masterpiece, their intricate diamond patterns not just decorative but designed to trap air and absorb blows. A well-made gambeson could turn a sword slash into a bruise, and in sweltering summer battles, its breathable fabric saved knights from heatstroke under their metal shells. But her craft went beyond padding. These seamstresses tailored arming caps that kept helmets from scraping scalps, sewed mail gussets into joints for flexibility, and even reinforced surcoats with hidden layers of silk, a trick crusaders learned from Mongol warriors, as the tightly woven fibers could sometimes stop an arrow from fully penetrating. The best were human calculators, knowing exactly how much to shrink woolen linings so they'd expand to a perfect fit when sweat soaked them during combat. What's often forgotten is how their work blurred gender lines in a male-dominated field. While armorers forged steel, these women handled the equally lethal mathematics of protection, calculating stitch density for maximum resistance or testing new padding blends by having apprentices strike them with blunted weapons. Guild records from Milan list seamstresses earning equal pay to their male counterparts for specialized defensive tailoring, a rare medieval nod to merit over gender. Their legacy lingers in modern terms like cutting through the red tape, which originated from the red linen threads these artisans used to mark fittings for nobility. Now, let's step from the seamstress's quiet workshop to the deafening chaos of the battlefield, where another unsung profession turned the tide of wars not with weapons but with wounds. Meet the camp follower surgeons, who stitched together what battles tore apart, often with nothing but wine for anesthesia and desperation for skill. The cordwainer's workshop smelled of fine Spanish leather and beeswax, a world away from the smoky reek of the cobbler's stall. These weren't mere shoemakers, they were sculptors of feet, crafting slippers so supple they molded to noble toes like second skins. While cobblers patched the worn soles of peasants, cordwainers worked with kid leather thin as parchment, stitching seams so tight they repelled rainwater without a drop penetrating. Their clientele included bishops and barons, men who paid in silver for boots lined with fleece to ward off castle chills, or riding shoes with heels shaped to grip stirrups. The finest pieces took weeks to complete, each step a ritual, soaking hides in walnut dye for that perfect russet hue, hammering soles until they flexed like living tissue, even embedding crushed rose petals between layers to perfume every step. What set cordwainers apart was their guild-enforced artistry. In London, apprentices trained for 7 years before touching Cordovan leather, the prized hide from Moorish Spain that gave the profession its name. Masterpieces bore secret marks stitched inside, guaranteeing authenticity against counterfeiters who sold pigskin as calf. Some cordwainers specialized in poulaines, those absurdly pointed shoes beloved by 14th century dandies, reinforcing the tips with whalebone so they curled upward like scimitars without collapsing. Others engineered hidden compartments in heels for love notes or poison, turning footwear into tools of intrigue. The cordwainer's true genius lay in understanding anatomy centuries before modern poetry. They built arch supports for knights who stood hours in armor, crafted asymmetrical lasts to correct noblemen's battle-born limps, and even designed silk-lined slippers for gout sufferers with toes swollen like overripe fruit. Their craft was so revered that Edward II's treasury records list cordwainer fees exceeding those of his royal tailors, proof that in the Middle Ages the road to power truly began at the soles. Now let's step from the cordwainer's hushed attel, into the clamorous throat of medieval cities where the water-bearer fought a daily battle against thirst and filth. While cordwainers pampered elite feet, these human aqueducts shouldered the weight of communal survival, their labor a stark reminder that luxury meant nothing without the basics of life. The water-bearer's yoke creaked under the weight of twin buckets, his path worn smooth by 1,000 trips between wells and homes. In cities where most drew water from polluted rivers or tainted public cisterns, these strong-backed workers were the difference between cholera and cleanliness for those who could afford their services. The smartest among them knew which wells ran sweetest in summer drought, which fountains nobles had blessed with silver coins to purify the water, and most crucially, which alleys to avoid when gangs fought over access. Some developed tricks like floating lettuce leaves in their buckets to keep water cool, or adding a drop of vinegar to mask foul tastes during algal blooms. What made their work extraordinary was its invisibility. A good water-bearer moved through streets like a shadow, filling household barrels before dawn so mistresses woke to the illusion of magic. The wealthiest employed full-time bearers who doubled as bodyguards, their heavy staves deterring thieves while their water ensured no aristocrat ever tasted the brackish swill commoners endured. London's records show some bearers formed cooperatives, controlling access to clean springs with near-monopoly ruthlessness during plagues when desperation made water worth more than wine. The contrast between cordwainer and water-bearer couldn't be starker, one crafting adornments for the privileged, the other hauling life's bare necessity. Yet both, in their own ways, walked the same cobbled streets of a world where skill and suffering were two sides of the same coin. And as we'll see next, some professions didn't just serve the living, they guided souls to what came after. The water-bearer's shoulders bore the weight of an entire city's thirst, his daily pilgrimage between wells and doorsteps a silent testament to medieval life's fragility. These human pipelines rose before dawn, their wooden yokes groaning under twin buckets that sloshed with water drawn from the few uncontaminated sources, perhaps a deep stone well blessed by monks or a spring just outside town walls where runoff couldn't taint the flow. In London alone, records suggest over 300 bearers crisscrossed the city daily, their routes weaving an invisible web of survival. Wealthy households paid retainers to make hourly trips, ensuring fresh water for cooking, laundering, and the all-important brewing of ale, while the poor queued at public conduits, risking dysentery from fouled communal buckets. What set exceptional water-bearers apart was their sixth sense for purity. The best could taste a well's decline before others noticed, avoiding sources where iron deposits turned water bitter or where nearby tanners' runoff lurked unseen. Some developed tricks like lining their buckets with clean linen to filter debris or adding a handful of barley. If the grains sank, the water was deemed safe. If they floated, danger lurked. In plague years, shrewd bearers heated stones to drop into their loads, boiling away impurities long before science understood pathogens. Their trade wasn't just labor, it was a constant negotiation with an element that could nourish or kill with equal indifference. Now let's follow the water-bearer's dripping trail to the courthouse steps, where another profession wielded a different kind of power, the Thumbikins operator. While bearers quenched physical thirst, these figures served justice's sharper draft, their tiny tools extracting truths as surely as wells drew water. The transition from life-giving labor to life-altering judgment may seem stark, but both roles reveal how medieval society balanced survival and order in equally inventive ways. The Thumbikins operator's hands moved with deceptive delicacy, their instrument a vise-like contraption of screws and plates, looking almost dainty until tightened around a suspect's digit. This was the medieval lie detector, its gradual pressure designed to make denial more painful than confession. Unlike flashier torture devices, the Thumbikins worked through subtlety rather than spectacle, leaving no visible marks but excruciating nerve pain. Court records from Bruges describe operators who could gauge guilt by how many turns it took to elicit a cry, their ears attuned to the difference between genuine agony and performative wails. What made this profession so chillingly effective was its psychological theater. Operators often began by casually demonstrating the device on themselves, turning the screws just enough to show it doesn't hurt yet. Some kept meticulously oiled tools to emphasize how smoothly pain could escalate, while others whispered questions between turns, creating unbearable suspense. The best understood that true power lay not in breaking bones but in controlling hope, offering merciful release the moment a confession spilled forth. Their work existed in the gray zone between law and terror, proving that sometimes the smallest instruments cast the longest shadows over justice. From the water-bearer's life-sustaining buckets to the Thumbikin's operator's truth-extracting vise, both professions remind us that necessity shapes roles as much as morality does. One quenched a city's thirst, the other its hunger for order, each indispensable in their own fraught way. The pillory master's hands moved with grim efficiency as he locked the wooden frame around another offender's neck and wrists, his work transforming bustling market squares into theaters of shame. This wasn't just about punishment, it was performance art designed to sear lessons into the community's memory. Picture the scene: a baker convicted of selling underweight loaves standing trapped for hours, his face smeared with rotten fruit as children giggled and dogs licked spilled ale from the grooves beneath his feet. The pillory master orchestrated every detail, from adjusting the height of the stocks to accommodate tall or short criminals, to ensuring the restraints were tight enough to prevent escape but loose enough to avoid cutting off circulation before the sentence ended. His role demanded a perverse kind of showmanship, knowing when to turn a blind eye to sympathetic villagers slipping water to the condemned, and when to crack down harshly on anyone attempting to free a friend prematurely. What made this profession uniquely medieval was its blend of brutality and bureaucracy. Pillory masters kept meticulous records of each punishment's duration and the crimes involved, often consulting with local magistrates to calibrate humiliation to the offense. A habitual thief might endure days in the stocks with ears nailed to the wood, while a first-time drunkard got off with a single afternoon of public mockery. Some masters even developed signature touches, like fitting particularly reviled criminals with oversized collars that forced their heads into uncomfortable tilts, or placing cheats near dung heaps to amplify their discomfort. The irony: many pillory masters were former criminals themselves, their intimate knowledge of the device's torments making them ideal enforcers. Now, let's step from the jeering crowds of the pillory to the quiet, smoky warmth of a profession that literally kept medieval life from freezing: the chimney sweep's apprentice. While the pillory master dealt in cold justice, these soot-covered children waged a daily battle against the creeping chill of winter, their small bodies squirming through flues as narrow as coffins. The chimney sweep's apprentice was the human brush that kept hearth fires burning and households breathing, a living sacrifice to the era's desperate need for heat. Boys as young as 6, and sometimes even smaller girls disguised as boys, were sold into the trade by families too poor to feed them, their slight frames perfect for navigating the labyrinth of brick and mortar that crisscrossed behind castle walls. Picture them at dawn, knees scraped raw from climbing rough interior surfaces, their only tools a wire scraper and a horsehair brush, their lungs filling with carcinogenic soot as they dislodged flammable creosote buildup. The best developed tricks, like holding a damp cloth between their teeth to filter ash, or using chickens lowered on ropes to peck at stubborn deposits in wide flues. What's often forgotten is how these children became accidental experts in medieval architecture. A skilled apprentice could map a nobleman's entire house by its chimneys, knowing which vents connected to the kitchen versus the bedchambers, and which tight bends might trap a careless sweep. Some were even recruited as burglars' accomplices, their knowledge of flue routes making them ideal guides for nighttime thefts. The horrors they endured: cancerous growths from soot, deformed limbs from years of unnatural contortions, suffocation in collapsed chimneys, sparked some of history's first child labor reforms. But for centuries, their silent labor meant the difference between a lord's banquet hall glowing with festive warmth and a peasant family waking to find their baby blue with cold. From the pillory master's public spectacles to the chimney sweep's hidden suffering, Both professions reveal the Middle Ages' unflinching pragmatism, whether enforcing order through humiliation or purchasing comfort with children's lives. And as we'll see next, some trades didn't just warm homes, they lit the very fires of knowledge. The charcoal burner's solitary existence was etched into the landscape, a smoldering testament to one of history's most vital yet invisible trades. Hidden deep in the woods, these men lived like ghosts for weeks at a time, their only companions the slow-burning mounds of earth-covered timber known as mailers. Picture these dome-shaped pyres, carefully constructed like ancient burial mounds, seeping thin tendrils of smoke through layers of damp leaves and turf. The burner's skill lay in controlling the fire's hunger, too much air, and the wood reduced to worthless ash, too little, and the process stalled. Nights were spent in makeshift huts, ears tuned to the hiss and crackle outside, ready to scramble if the wind shifted or the smoke turned from blue-gray to the dreaded white that signaled disaster. Charcoal wasn't just fuel, it was the lifeblood of medieval industry. Blacksmiths relied on its intense, smokeless heat to forge swords and plowshares, while households prized it for cooking fires that wouldn't choke entire halls with smoke. The finest burners could produce charcoal so pure it burned hotter than coal, its creation a week-long alchemy of patience and precision. Some developed tricks like stacking wood radially for even burns or using specific tree species, oak for longevity, birch for quick ignition, to meet a client's needs. Guild records from the Black Forest reveal burners marking their charcoal with secret notches, a primitive quality assurance system in an era where counterfeit bundles of half-burnt wood could ruin a smith's work. What's often forgotten is the burners' profound connection to the land. These weren't just laborers, they were early ecologists practicing sustainable coppicing centuries before the term existed. A skilled burner knew which stands of trees to harvest and which to leave, ensuring the forest would regrow for future generations. Their isolation bred superstition. Many were thought to commune with forest spirits or predict the weather by reading smoke patterns. Yet their true magic was turning the mundane into the miraculous. Ordinary wood transformed into the carbon backbone of an entire civilization. Now, let's step from the smoky solitude of the charcoal burners' world to the hushed reverence of a profession that guarded something even more precious than fuel: the written word itself. While burners fueled forges, the scriptorium scribe kept the fires of knowledge burning, their quills preserving thoughts that would outlast empires. The scrivener's fingers cramped around the quill as candlelight flickered across vellum, each stroke of ink preserving words that might otherwise have vanished into time's abyss. These weren't mere copyists, they were human printing presses, their hands bridging centuries as they transcribed everything from bawdy Chaucer tales to fragile medical treatises. Picture a monastic scriptorium in winter, where scribes worked wrapped in furs against the cold, their breath visible as they painstakingly replicated letters with the precision of watchmakers. A single Bible could take a year to complete, the scribe's world reduced to the scrape of nib on prepared calfskin, the scent of iron gall ink, the occasional swear when a droplet marred hours of work. What set exceptional scriveners apart was their ability to become invisible. The best replicated script so faithfully that historians still struggle to distinguish originals from copies. Some developed tricks like pricking parchment margins with needle-thin guidelines or mixing ink with oak apples for richer blacks. Legal scriveners in London's Inns of Court memorized standardized clauses to draft contracts without hesitation, their quills moving as swiftly as merchants' tongues during deals. Their errors became historical treasures: a doodled dragon in a margin, a grumble about cold fingers scribbled beside a psalm, reminders that these guardians of knowledge were gloriously, achingly human. Now let's step from the scrivener's silent scriptorium to the raucous world of the Jongleur, where knowledge wasn't penned but performed. While scribes preserved words on parchment, these one-person entertainment troupes kept stories alive through song, acrobatics, and sheer charisma. A talented jongleur might juggle knives while singing scandalous ballads about local nobles, then somersault into a retelling of King Arthur's battles, all while passing a hat for coins. Their repertoires blended high art and low humor, one moment reciting troubadour poetry in flawless Occitan, the next belching the alphabet to make children squeal. What made jongleurs indispensable was their role as medieval news networks. Traveling between villages, they carried gossip alongside legends, their performances updating communities on everything from distant wars to which lord had drunkenly fallen into a fishpond. The smartest jongleurs mastered the art of walking political tightropes, mocking powerful figures just enough to delight commoners without earning a whipping. Some even coded messages into tunes, smuggling information between castles under the guise of entertainment. Unlike scriveners' work, theirs was ephemeral, written not on parchment but in the memories of audiences who'd retell their tales for generations. The contrast between these professions reveals medieval knowledge's dual nature, one fixed in ink, the other fluid as a melody. Both ensured ideas survived, whether through the scrivener's exacting quill or the jongleur's nimble tongue. And as we'll see next, some performers didn't just share stories, they became them. The jester's bells jingled with every mocking step, a sound that struck terror into the hearts of kings and comfort into the souls of peasants. These weren't mere entertainers, they were the razor's edge between laughter and treason, their motley costumes serving as armor against retribution. Picture the scene, a banquet hall thick with tension as the jester reenacted the duke's latest military blunder, his exaggerated gestures drawing nervous titters from nobles too afraid to speak plainly. The best jesters wielded satire like surgeons wielded scalpels, cutting through pretense to expose corruption with rhymes so catchy they spread through taverns like wildfire. Some even carried Marat dolls' miniature replicas of themselves that they'd use to whisper dangerous truths, as if the fool said it, not me. What set jesters apart was their sacred license to provoke. While commoners could lose tongues for criticizing the crown, a skilled jester might skewer royal hypocrisy one moment and receive a gold coin the next. Their humor was a survival tactic. Henry VIII's fool, Will Sommers, famously halted the king's rage over Anne Boleyn's betrayal by handing him a mock scepter made of sausages. Yet behind the antics lay acute political savvy. Jesters memorized court gossip, studied foreign languages to mock ambassadors, and even acted as unofficial diplomats, smuggling messages in their absurd songs. Their true power wasn't in making rulers laugh, but in making them listen, because sometimes truth slips through the door when it's wearing bells. Now, let's trade the jester's cap for the sweat-stained straw hat of a profession that fed kingdoms rather than mocked them. While jesters shaped opinions, the plowman shaped the very land that sustained medieval life, one back-breaking furrow at a time. The plowman's hands were maps of calluses, each ridge marking seasons spent guiding oxen through stubborn soil. This wasn't just farming, it was a high-stakes dance with nature, where a single bad harvest could doom villages to famine. Picture the rhythmic scrape of the coulter slicing earth, the wooden moldboard turning dense clay into fertile ribbons, while children scrambled behind to sow seeds in the freshly opened ground. The plowman's expertise determined whether fields would yield golden wheat or wither into wasteland. His knowledge of when to plant, when to fallow, and how to angle blades for different soils passed down through generations like sacred texts. What made their work revolutionary was the heavy-wheeled plow's arrival in the 11th century, a technological leap that transformed agriculture. Unlike scratch plows that merely gouged the surface, This beast of wood and iron dug deep, aerating compacted earth and unlocking nutrients in previously unfarmable northern soils. Ploughmen became local celebrities, their skills so vital that villages often shared a single plough team, pooling oxen to pull the massive implement. Some developed near mystical reputations, whispered to predict rain by the ache in their bones or charm stubborn beasts with secret chants. The contrast between jester and ploughman reveals medieval society's dual engines. One fed minds with daring truths, the other fed bellies with honest labor. Both, in their own ways, tilled the ground for change, whether through seeds of dissent or seeds of barley. And as we'll see next, some professions didn't just work the land, they defended it with blades sharper than any jester's tongue. Ploughwrights' workshops smelled of freshly shaved oak and hot iron, a place where agricultural revolutions took shape one wooden beam at a time. These unsung engineers didn't just repair broken ploughs, they reimagined them, carving curved moldboards from aged hardwood and forging coulters sharp enough to slice through stubborn clay. Picture them bending over a half-finished frame, testing the angle of a draft beam with hands calloused from decades of shaping the tools that shaped civilization itself. A well-made plough could mean the difference between a village thriving or starving, and the Wright's genius lay in customizing each one, adjusting the pitch of the share for rocky fields or widening the moldboard for lighter soils. What set master ploughwrights apart was their intuitive grasp of physics long before Newton. They knew a plough's belly needed just enough curve to turn soil without dragging, that ash wood resisted splitting better than elm for beams, and that iron tips lasted twice as long when quenched in brine rather than water. Some became traveling specialists, moving between villages during slack seasons, their arrival as anticipated as the harvest. Guild records from Normandy reveal Wrights marking their ploughs with secret notches, not just for pride, but so farmers could identify whose craftsmanship had earned their trust. The ploughwright's legacy hides in plain sight today. Modern tractors still use versions of their moldboard design, and terms like ploughshare endure as linguistic fossils of their ingenuity. Their true masterpiece wasn't wood or iron, but the abundance they made possible fields fertile enough to feed growing cities, surplus harvests that fueled trade, and ultimately, the stability that let medieval Europe climb from subsistence to surplus. Now let's follow those burgeoning trade routes to a profession that stood between merchants and chaos: the packhorse master. While ploughwrights fueled agriculture, these logistical wizards kept goods moving across mountains and moors, their trains of sure-footed ponies serving as the 18-wheelers of the Middle Ages. The packhorse master's life unfolded along treacherous trails where wagons dared not roll, his string of sturdy ponies laden with wool sacks, salt blocks, or precious metal ingots. This wasn't just transport, it was high-stakes ballet, each animal's load meticulously balanced to prevent disastrous shifts on cliffside paths. The best masters knew their ponies like siblings, recognizing which could shoulder an extra barrel of wine or needed lighter loads after a hoof abscess. Their routes were trade secrets passed down through generations, avoiding bandit-haunted forests and toll-hungry lords alike. What made their work extraordinary was the sheer scale of their networks. A single master might coordinate relays of fresh horses across 100 miles, timing arrivals so perishable goods like fish or cheese reached markets still edible. Some developed ingenious packing systems, waterproof leather panniers for books, wicker crates that flexed with pottery to prevent cracking. The smartest doubled as smugglers, hollowing out cheese wheels to hide silks or stitching silver coins into saddle padding. The contrast between ploughwright and packhorse master reveals medieval survival's twin engines. One fed the land, the other fed commerce. Both were quiet architects of prosperity, turning soil and trail alike into pathways out of scarcity. And as we'll see next, some professions didn't just move goods, they moved ideas, carrying knowledge across continents as relentlessly as any plow cutting through earth. The wool stapler's fingers moved through fleeces like a musician tuning an instrument, each tug, each visual inspection revealing the hidden symphony of quality in what seemed simple bundles of fiber. These weren't just merchants, they were the unsung conductors of medieval commerce, their grading systems determining whether wool would become coarse peasant cloth or the finest Flemish tapestry. Picture a bustling English wool market in the 1400s, where staplers rubbed locks between their palms to test suppleness, held strands to sunlight to check for even dye absorption, or even tasted wool to detect residual lanolin that might affect processing. Their expertise built entire cities. Take Cotswold, Golden Fleece, so prized that its grading standards became the backbone of international trade agreements, or the Welsh mountain wool that staplers meticulously separated into 20 distinct quality tiers. What made their role revolutionary was how they standardized an inherently variable product. A master stapler could predict how a fleece would behave at every stage from spinning to fulling, just by examining its crimp pattern under a magnifying glass. Some developed secret notation systems, marking bales with cryptic symbols that communicated quality to weavers across language barriers. Their guilds wielded astonishing power. The Worshipful Company of Woolmen in London could confiscate and burn substandard shipments, protecting England's reputation as Europe's premier wool supplier. The staplers' true legacy lies in the economic ecosystems they nurtured. By establishing consistent pricing tiers, they enabled credit systems where wool could be traded like currency. Italian bankers accepted graded fleeces as loan collateral, and dowries were sometimes paid in stapler-certified sacks. Their work didn't just clothe bodies, it built the financial scaffolding of the medieval world. Now, let's follow those lucrative wool trails to the lavish chambers where another profession turned luxury into power. While staplers mastered fibers, the royal furrier transformed pelts into political statements, crafting garments where every stitch whispered status. The royal furrier's workshop was a treasure cave of softness and shadow, where ermine pelts shimmered like winter moonlight and sable skins carried the musk of distant Russian forests. These artisans didn't just sew, they performed alchemy, turning dead animals into living symbols of authority. A single robe might require 200 squirrel bellies, the tiny, snow-white fur patches from beneath the tails, sewn with such precision that nobles could flaunt laws restricting certain furs to specific ranks. The finest furriers developed techniques like letting out, slicing pelts into delicate strips and reassembling them for fluid drape, or powdering furs with crushed bone to maintain luster. What set them apart was their role as medieval image consultants. They knew which furs conveyed intimidation, wolf trim for judges, piety, lamb's wool for bishops, or fertility, fox for newlyweds. Some kept pattern books showing how to arrange spotted lynx pelts to mimic heraldic designs or stitch vair fur into alternating blue-gray bands that inspired castle architecture. Their craft blurred into diplomacy when English kings sent ermine-trimmed robes to French rivals. It wasn't generosity but psychological warfare, a reminder of who controlled the luxury trade. From the wool stapler's methodical grading to the furrier's theatrical opulence, both professions reveal how medieval commerce wasn't just about utility. It was about transforming raw materials into narratives of power. And as we'll see next, some trades didn't just dress nobility, they kept their secrets too. The Jura moved through the castle with silent precision, his silver pitcher catching the morning light as he poured scented water over a noblewoman's hands before breakfast. This wasn't mere hospitality, it was theater, a daily performance of privilege where even cleanliness became a status symbol. The water itself told a story. Rose petals steeped for ladies, rosemary for scholars to sharpen the mind, or sometimes imported citrus rinds so rare their scent alone marked the elite. Uaras didn't just serve, they orchestrated rituals, knowing exactly when to offer basins during feasts after the third course, before fruit, or how to angle towels so embroidered family crests faced observers. Their most prized skill, pouring without splashing silk, a feat requiring years of practice with weighted practice ewers. What made their role extraordinary was its intimacy. An Uara saw lords at their most vulnerable sleep, rumpled and yawning, yet maintained perfect deference. Some became confessors by accident, their silent presence during private washings making them trusted keepers of secrets. Household records from Burgundy reveal Uaras doubling as intelligence gatherers, noting which visiting nobles washed their hands too hastily, a sign of peasant roots, or who admired the silver basin a bit too long, potential thieves. Their tools were status markers too. A Venetian glass ewer could cost more than a farmer's yearly earnings, while commoners made do with shared wooden buckets. This obsession with washing wasn't just vanity. In an age before germ theory, the elite believed cleanliness, or its careful appearance, warded off disease. Uaras sometimes added vinegar as a primitive disinfectant or floated herbs thought to purify. Their work created the illusion of safety through scent and ceremony, proving even hygiene could be weaponized as class distinction. Now, let's step from the Uara's perfumed world to a profession that didn't just serve nobility, it served heaven itself. Our final medieval role takes us from silver basins to sacred spaces, where the bell ringer didn't just mark time but connected earth to the divine. Perched in drafty towers with ropes blistering their palms, these men and women were the human metronomes of faith, their peals organizing not just daily life but the very rhythm of salvation. Before mechanical clocks, bell ringers were the town's heartbeat, their wrists measuring out existence in bronze reverberations. A skilled ringer could make those massive instruments sing, pulling just enough to create a mellow toll for funerals, or yanking violently for the clamorous joy bells after royal births. Their work required both brute strength and delicate timing. Change-ringing patterns were mathematical marvels where a second's delay ruined the sequence. Some developed calluses so thick they could handle ropes without gloves even in winter, while others memorized dozens of complex methods with names like grandsire triples that still challenge modern campanologists. What set bell ringers apart was their sacred responsibility. Church bells were believed to literally ward off demons and storms, requiring special consecrations where bishops anointed them with holy oil. During plagues, ringers worked until their arms gave out, the constant peals meant to cleanse pestilential air. Their most somber duty, the passing bell, rung as souls departed to guide them heavenward, a single stroke for each year of the deceased's life that let entire towns mourn strangers. The contrast between Uara and bell ringer reveals medieval society's twin obsessions, earthly status and heavenly connection. One polished noble hands with imported linens, the other rang the heavens with calloused ones, both, in their own ways, orchestrating order in a chaotic world. And so our journey through forgotten professions ends not with a whimper, but with a resounding peal across centuries, reminding us that every echo from the past carries the fingerprints of those who shaped it. The bell ringer's calloused hands gripped the rope as the first peal shattered the morning stillness, sending vibrations through the tower stones and echoing across thatched roofs below. This wasn't just noise, it was a language understood by all, marking time's passage with bronze tongues that spoke of births, deaths, invasions, and holy days. Picture them ascending spiral staircases before dawn, their breath fogging in the icy tower air as they prepared to conduct the village's daily rhythm. A skilled ringer could make those massive bells sing with personality, the hurried tick-tock of workday warnings, the joyful cacophony of wedding celebrations, or the slow, mournful tolls that seemed to make the very air heavier with grief. Their ropes bore witness to history, fibers frayed from pulling alarm bells during raids, or stained with sweat during marathon, ringing for royal coronations that lasted hours. What made their role extraordinary was its duality. Bell ringers straddled the line between earthly timekeepers and heavenly messengers. Church bells were believed to literally push back storm clouds and frighten away demons, requiring special rites where priests anointed them with holy oils. The timing of their peals followed celestial patterns: two matins at midnight, lauds at dawn, vespers as the sun dipped, transforming abstract faith into audible structure. Some ringers developed near mystical reputations, like those who could predict deaths by noticing which bells sang differently on certain mornings. Their most sacred duty, the passing bell, where each solemn stroke represented a year of the departed's life, allowing entire communities to count along and mourn strangers as neighbors. Beyond spirituality, bell ringers were medieval information networks. The specific sequences conveyed urgent meanings long before telegraphs existed. A rapid back and forth between two bells signaled fire, while a single bell's insistent clamor meant enemy sighted. Towns employed code ringers who memorized complex patterns to communicate across valleys, their peals carrying farther than shouts. During the Black Death, some ringers worked until their arms gave out, the constant tolling both a prayer for mercy and a grim census of the dead. Their bodies became living chronometers the best could feel when to pull based on the bell's swing rather than sight, developing an internal rhythm as precise as any clock. As we reflect on these 30 forgotten professions, their true legacy isn't just in the peculiar tasks they performed, but in how they wove the fabric of daily survival. From the Ale Connor's tavern judgments to the bell ringer's heaven-reaching peals, each role was a thread in the tapestry of communal life, sometimes practical, sometimes poetic, always essential. They remind us that history isn't just made by kings and battles, but by the unsung hands that kept bread rising, wounds healing, and bells ringing through the centuries. Their stories whisper an enduring truth: civilization advances not on grand ideas alone, but on the calloused palms of those who turn necessity into craft and craft into legacy. From Ale Connors judging beer quality by the cling of their leather breeches to bell ringers conducting the very rhythm of medieval life, these 30 forgotten professions paint a portrait of an era where necessity bred astonishing ingenuity. Each role, no matter how peculiar it seems today, was a vital stitch in the tapestry of daily survival. The gong farmer knee-deep in cesspits, the whipping boy bearing a prince's punishments, the herb strewer masking castle odors with fragrant meadowsweet, they all shared one unshakable truth: in the Middle Ages, work wasn't just about earning bread. It was about holding chaos at bay, one specialized skill at a time. What makes these professions so captivating isn't just their oddity, but what they reveal about human adaptability. Take the chimney sweep's apprentice, a child forced into dangerous, soot-choked flues alongside the royal furrier crafting ermine-trimmed robes. One existed in grime and shadows, the other in perfumed opulence, yet both were products of the same world. This contrast reminds us that medieval society wasn't monolithic. It thrived on interdependence. The armorer's seamstress stitching gambesons saved as many lives as the knight wearing them, just as the scrivener's quill preserved knowledge as powerfully as any king's decree. Perhaps the greatest lesson lies in how these roles mirror our modern struggles. The water bearer hauling clean buckets past contaminated wells isn't so different from today's delivery drivers during a pandemic. The clock knocker's nightly rounds echo in our smartphone alarms, and the Ale Connors quality checks anticipate FDA inspections by centuries. History never truly invents, it adapts. These professions show how people turned limitations into creativity, whether through the limner's painstaking illuminations or the packhorse master's smuggling tricks. So which role resonates with you? The cunning folk walking the line between healer and outcast, the jester wielding humor as both shield and weapon, or maybe the plowman whose sweat literally fed nations? Drop your favorites in the comments. I'd love to hear which stories stuck with you. If you enjoyed this dive into history's hidden corners, hit subscribe and ring that bell so you won't miss our next adventure into the past. Until then, remember, behind every dusty parchment or crumbling castle wall, there's always another surprising tale waiting to be uncovered.